see the leg move this way instead. So they're starting to develop, they're using this as the basis for designing a particular prosthetic for this person. So the notion of neural intent, it seems to me, this notion that we have intent is deeply encoded in who we are. And that we can use this idea of intent, deeply coded, as the basis for actually beginning to think about the consequences that attach, right? So if you have a neurally intended prosthetic, your action and the consequences that attach to it are not just the neural intent you send. It moves the prosthetic that picks up the cup of coffee that gives you, right? All of that's your action, not just giving the neural intent. And that's what we're trying to figure out with the support network. How much of the consequences of what they do for me are my action? Okay, so that's one step, right? Is that we can ascribe intention to someone's gesture or action. The next, and I drew on Jonathan's case because I thought it reveals this other challenge that we're all discontinuous beings. We all have conflicting intentions. We're conscious and repressed, and I mean the whole figure of what the 20th century gave us a very clear picture of our identities as subjects as very conflicted and discontinuous in many ways. And part of the challenge then in supporting a person who presents to us their supporters very conflicting intentions is about which one to choose. Do I follow this action? Do I follow this gesture? Do I follow that gesture? And I think the work in sort of hermeneutics, and Ricoeur's work in particular, and others, is very helpful in helping us think about who we are as selves. That our identities are narrated. We live our lives in the context of a story, and there's a lot of work in understanding the consciousness of action. That we actually go through the world in narrated ways, and that helps us think about the basis of the norms on which we choose to follow this intention versus that intention. That a person, we narrate what matters to a person through their life. It's not just at one point in time. We have a relationship to the people that we're supporting that extends through time, that gives us a sense of what this person wants, what matters to this person. And in narrating that begins to give us the standards on which we're going to choose to follow, prosthetically or otherwise, this intended, what appears to be this intention over that. Again, what I'm doing here is not trying to come up with a toolkit of steps to do supported decision making. I'm trying to think about how we articulate the nature of the practice that that supporters provide. The next section, and just I'll bring this to a close, on how we think about orchestrating the consequences of someone's intended action, I think is really critical here, because there's going to be questions of imputation, if you will. In the case of the breach of a contract, or torts or criminal responsibility, can we have it both ways, in effect? Can we say, this is the intention and this follows, and ergo, these were the consequences, and all of these consequences get enfolded within Michael's action, because we want to make Michael an agent in the world, and my supporters are going to be my network, or going to be my kind of prosthetic, using yesterday's metaphor, that helps me carry that out. But when things go wrong, actually it's not Michael's fault or his action after all, right? Like, so we've got to be, there's a dilemma about how we think about this. Can you have it both ways? Because if we think we can, then in a sense it bankrupts the notion of supported decision making, right? We'll use this prosthetic notion, or we'll use this idea that we're really just following and translating Michael's intention and will into action as long as it works out. And when it doesn't work out, then we'll say, oh, actually, you know, he didn't really, like, we were actually doing that. It wasn't, you know, or somebody did it. You know, it wasn't really him. So we can't really have it. We can't really have it both ways. I'm not sure. I mean, I think there's some ways around that. You know, if my intention is criminal in some way, then my supporters are not. I mean, they would be violating probably their responsibilities if they, you know, just prosthetically allowed me or enabled me to carry out my criminal intent. They statutorily, as they do in the sort of emerging statutes that we have some other responsibilities not to do that. If we do things, if everybody acts reasonably and things still don't work out, you know, there's a breach of contract or whatever, well, then yeah, there are consequences to be dealt with. But that happens all the time. Contracts are breached all the time. You figure out how to manage consequences, right? And that becomes part of the supporters, part of the supporters' responsibility. So I don't think that this necessarily. I mean, at one point I was thinking, you know, I guess the other sort of route through this, and this is something I think, you know, hasn't been sort of fully thought out yet. You know, Article 12.2 talks about the basis of comparison is non-disabled others. You have a legal capacity, you know, your right to exercise your legal capacity on an equal basis with others, those non-disabled others. And non-disabled others have, you know, recourse to a claim of, or to a defense of incapacity to minimize responsibility. But I'm not sure that that's the route that we want to go through the justification for this. So I think there's a number of questions that we have to deal with around how we attach consequences to the person that we're supporting. The final section, and this I know returns to part of a big chunk of the discussion yesterday morning, which I called claiming moral status as one of the steps that the supporters provide. And I argue that, or suggest in the paper, that this is an essential part of the process of supported decision making. And I do it from the vantage point of what some philosophers have referred to as moral rights externalism. So the idea that we don't gain our moral status from a natural rights approach, you know, which is all persons are, you know, all humans are persons by virtue of being born and being in the world. You know, which is certainly an improvement on the earlier version from natural rights that, you know, all those are persons who are humans who have reason and rationality of a certain type. So now we can say, you know, actually no, all humans universally are persons, that's the kind of tack that we've taken in the convention. But the position for moral rights, but as we all, I think we can't be satisfied with that position. Say, well, we've solved it now. Because what we said is that actually all humans are persons, and so have equal moral status. So I don't think we can solve it by simply definitional fiat. And that's really what moral rights externalism takes up. The idea that you don't actually have rights until they're recognized as such. You don't actually have them, you don't actually experience them until they're recognized as such. And they need to be recognized at various levels of social recognition. So that we all have a right to legal capacity without discrimination on the basis of disability is realized in one sphere of social recognition, which is at the level of international law. We've got it there. We're recognized there. But that's not the only sphere that we live our lives in. And one of the things that I think supported decision-making has done, or what it tries to do, and this is where one of the dilemmas that we talked about yesterday afternoon, or where we get into a dilemma, is that you know, it's the principle of subsidiarity, right? Like what supported decision-making has done is say, well, let's put the responsibility for the appropriate authority close